The stranger who saved his life knew every mistake he had ever made. Ethan Brooks never expected an ordinary Thursday evening to become the dividing line between his past and future. The charity gala had been designed as a celebration. Hundreds of guests filled the ballroom of a luxury hotel in downtown Chicago. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the crowd while a jazz ensemble performed softly near the stage. Business leaders, investors, and public figures moved through the room exchanging handshakes and conversations. Ethan stood near the center of it all. At 39 years old, he had built a successful financial consulting firm and earned a reputation as someone who always remained in control. His fiancée, Madison Reed, stood beside him greeting guests with effortless confidence. From every visible angle, Ethan appeared to have the perfect life. Yet perfection has a way of disappearing without warning. As the evening progressed, Ethan felt a strange pressure building behind his eyes. At first he ignored it. The event schedule was packed, and dozens of people wanted his attention. He blamed the discomfort on stress and lack of sleep. Over the previous month, he had been working longer hours than usual. The pressure in his head continued growing. By the time dinner was served, even simple conversations required concentration. Madison noticed immediately. "You do not look well," she whispered. Ethan forced a smile. "I am fine." But he was not. Minutes later, while preparing to deliver a speech thanking the event sponsors, Ethan suddenly lost his balance. The room tilted. Voices blurred together. Crystal lights stretched into streaks above him. Concerned faces appeared around him, but they seemed impossibly distant. Someone called his name. Another person reached for him. Then everything faded into darkness. Panic erupted throughout the ballroom. Guests stepped aside while hotel staff immediately contacted emergency services. Within minutes, paramedics arrived and transported Ethan to one of the most respected medical centers in Illinois. News of the incident spread quickly among family members, friends, and business associates. Madison followed the ambulance, fighting tears during the entire drive. When Ethan arrived at the hospital, medical personnel moved with remarkable speed. Doctors reviewed scans. Specialists examined test results. Nurses prepared emergency equipment. Deep within the hospital, a senior physician studied Ethan's file while listening carefully to updates from the trauma team. Her expression remained calm. Focused. Determined. "Prepare operating room 3, she said firmly. The staff responded immediately. No one questioned her judgment. No one hesitated. Throughout the hospital, her reputation was legendary. Patients trusted her. Colleagues respected her. Administrators relied upon her during the most difficult cases. As Ethan was rushed toward surgery, he briefly opened his eyes. The bright lights above him blurred into white shapes. Through the haze, he noticed a figure standing beside the moving bed. A woman wearing surgical attire and a protective mask. He could not see her face clearly. He could not recognize her voice. Yet something about her felt strangely familiar. Then darkness returned. What Ethan did not know was that the doctor now fighting to save his life was someone he once knew better than anyone else in the world. For 12 exhausting hours, the lights above operating room 3 never turned off. Outside the surgical wing, anxiety spread through the waiting area as family members, colleagues, and friends searched for answers. Madison sat quietly beside the window clutching her phone with both hands. Every passing minute felt longer than the one before. Nurses moved through the corridor carrying charts and medical equipment while physicians entered and exited consultation rooms. Yet one door remained closed. Behind it, an entire team fought to save Ethan's life. At the center of that team stood the same doctor who had taken control of the case from the moment he arrived. Her voice remained calm. Precise. Unshaken by pressure. Throughout the night she reviewed scans, guided decisions, and adjusted treatment plans with extraordinary focus. Younger physicians listened carefully whenever she spoke. Experienced surgeons trusted her judgment without hesitation. In a profession where seconds often mattered, confidence like hers could not be taught. It had been earned through years of discipline and sacrifice. Shortly after midnight, one of the attending physicians stepped into the waiting area to provide an update. Madison immediately rose from her chair. The doctor's expression was serious but hopeful. "He is still in surgery," he explained. "The situation remains complex, but he is receiving exceptional care." Madison nodded quietly. "Will he survive?" The physician paused before answering. "If anyone can get him through this, it is the surgeon leading the case." The response offered comfort, but it also created curiosity. Throughout the hospital, people spoke about this surgeon with unusual respect. Nurses mentioned her name in passing. Residents referred to her as a mentor. Administrators trusted her with the most challenging cases. Yet very few people outside the hospital seemed to know much about her personal life. Hours later, as dawn approached, exhaustion settled over the surgical team. Coffee cups sat untouched on nearby counters. Monitors displayed changing numbers. Medical staff continued working with unwavering concentration. Finally, after one last review, the lead surgeon stepped back. Relief quietly spread through the room. The most dangerous stage of the night had passed. Outside, the first light of morning appeared beyond the hospital windows. Shortly afterward, the surgeon removed her gloves and walked into a private consultation room. She remained alone for several moments, staring through the glass toward the city skyline. Memories she rarely revisited drifted briefly through her thoughts. A younger version of herself. Long nights studying medicine. Dreams that once seemed impossible. A marriage that slowly unraveled under the weight of different ambitions. She closed her eyes for a second before returning to the present. None of that mattered now. Her responsibility had been to save a patient. Nothing more. Several hours later, Ethan remained unconscious in intensive care, unaware of the battle that had taken place around him. Unaware that someone from his past had spent the entire night refusing to give up on him. And when he finally opened his eyes, the first voice he would hear would awaken a memory he could not quite explain. When Ethan finally opened his eyes, the world returned in fragments. Soft beeping sounds echoed through the room. Sunlight filtered through partially closed blinds. The faint scent of antiseptic drifted through the air. For several seconds, he simply stared at the ceiling, trying to understand where he was. Then memories returned. The charity gala. The speech. The dizziness. After that, nothing. A nurse standing nearby immediately noticed he was awake and smiled warmly. "Welcome back, Mr. Brooks." Ethan attempted to speak, but his throat felt dry. "How long?" he asked quietly. 2 days, she answered. The number surprised him. 2 entire days had disappeared. Over the following hours, doctors visited regularly, explaining that his condition had been serious and that his recovery would require patience. Ethan listened carefully, grateful simply to be alive. Yet one question remained fixed in his mind. Who saved him? Every physician he spoke with offered the same answer. He had been fortunate to have one of the hospital's most respected specialists leading his case. Whenever Ethan asked for a name, the conversation somehow moved on to other topics. It was not secrecy. It was simply timing. The surgeon remained busy with patients, procedures, and responsibilities throughout the hospital. Late that afternoon, as sunlight faded beyond the windows, Ethan heard a familiar voice outside his room. It lasted only a few seconds. Calm. Professional. Confident. Something about it immediately captured his attention. The feeling was impossible to explain. The voice seemed connected to a memory buried deep within his past. Before he could place it, the conversation ended and footsteps disappeared down the hallway. Ethan stared toward the door long after the sound was gone. The sensation lingered. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the hospital, Dr. Amelia Carter reviewed patient charts inside her office. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Chicago skyline while awards and medical publications lined nearby shelves. Her schedule remained packed from morning until evening. consultations, procedures, meetings. Yet despite the demands of her profession, she never appeared rushed. Years of experience had taught her how to remain calm under pressure. A young resident entered carrying several files. "Dr. Carter, your patient in room 814 is awake." Amelia paused briefly before nodding. She already knew which patient the resident meant. News traveled quickly through the hospital. For a moment, her gaze drifted toward the city beyond the glass. 7 years had passed since she last saw Ethan. 7 years filled with growth, challenges, sacrifices, and achievements neither of them could have imagined back then. Yet standing in his hospital room was not something she intended to do immediately. The focus remained on his recovery. Nothing else. Back upstairs, Ethan continued replaying that familiar voice in his thoughts. He could not explain why it mattered. He could not explain why it felt connected to another chapter of his life. But the feeling refused to disappear. And as evening settled across the city, he became increasingly certain of one thing. Somewhere inside this hospital was a person he once knew. Someone connected to a past he thought had been left behind forever. Recovery brought Ethan something he did not expect. Time. For the first time in years, endless meetings, financial reports, and business deadlines no longer controlled every hour of his day. Confined to a hospital room overlooking downtown Chicago, he spent long stretches simply observing the world beyond the glass. Traffic moved through the streets below. Helicopters crossed the skyline. Morning sunlight painted golden reflections across neighboring buildings. Yet despite the peaceful surroundings, his thoughts repeatedly returned to the same mystery. Who was the surgeon who saved him? Every person he asked offered praise but very few details. Nurses described her as extraordinary. Specialists referred to her as one of the finest physicians in the country. Administrators spoke about her leadership with admiration. The more Ethan listened, the more curious he became. One afternoon, while taking a supervised walk through one of the rehabilitation corridors, he noticed a large display wall celebrating the hospital's achievements. Photographs, awards, and medical milestones filled the space. Patients often stopped to read the stories. Ethan slowed his pace as he studied the exhibits. One framed article highlighted groundbreaking surgical innovations. Another recognized humanitarian medical missions around the world. Then his attention settled on a familiar name. Dr. Amelia Carter. Ethan stopped walking. For a moment he simply stared. The name appeared beneath a photograph accompanying an article about advanced surgical leadership. His pulse quickened. Amelia Carter. The words felt impossible. Years earlier, Amelia had dreamed of becoming a physician. Ethan remembered the long nights she spent studying. The stacks of textbooks covering their apartment. The endless exams and clinical rotations. He also remembered something far less flattering. He remembered doubting her. Back then, he often viewed her ambitions as unrealistic. He convinced himself he was being practical, successful, responsible. Looking back now, the memory felt uncomfortable. A rehabilitation therapist noticed him staring at the display. "Remarkable woman," she said with a smile. Ethan nodded slowly. "You know her?" The therapist laughed softly. "Everyone here knows her. She has saved countless lives." Ethan looked at the photograph again. The image showed a confident physician standing beside a medical research team. The Amelia he remembered seemed very far away from the woman in that picture. Before he could ask more questions, another patient requested assistance and the therapist continued down the corridor. Ethan remained behind for several seconds. The coincidence felt strange. Unsettling. He knew Amelia Carter was not an uncommon name. Logic suggested there could be many people with that name. Yet something about the discovery refused to leave him. Later that evening, he sat alone reviewing hospital materials left on a nearby table. One brochure featured several department leaders. There it was again. Dr. Amelia Carter, Chief of Advanced Surgical Medicine. Ethan stared at the page in disbelief. Outside his room, footsteps echoed through the hallway. Then a familiar voice drifted briefly past the door. Calm. Confident. Professional. The same voice he had heard before. This time, however, the memory struck harder than ever. And for the first time since waking up, Ethan began to wonder whether the answer to the hospital's greatest mystery was standing much closer than he realized. The discovery refused to leave Ethan alone. Every time he looked at the hospital brochure, the same name stared back at him. Dr. Amelia Carter. Chief of Advanced Surgical Medicine. The coincidence felt too precise. Too impossible. Yet logic continued fighting against memory. 7 years had passed since the divorce. 7 years since he and Amelia last shared a conversation. During that time, he had assumed she moved on with an ordinary life somewhere far from Chicago. He never imagined her name would appear on hospital walls beside international awards and groundbreaking medical achievements. The following morning, Ethan began paying closer attention to the people around him. Nurses spoke about Dr. Carter constantly. One described how she regularly stayed late to help difficult cases. Another mentioned medical journals featuring her research. A third proudly explained that patients traveled from across the country specifically to seek her expertise. Every story painted the same picture. Dr. Carter was not simply respected. She was exceptional. As Ethan listened, an uncomfortable feeling settled inside him. Memories began returning more clearly. He remembered evenings years ago when Amelia sat at the kitchen table surrounded by textbooks. He remembered her determination after exhausting classes and clinical rotations. Most of all, he remembered the arguments. The disagreements about priorities. The frustration he felt whenever her medical training demanded more time. Back then, he convinced himself her ambitions created distance between them. Now, sitting inside a hospital she helped lead, that perspective suddenly seemed painfully incomplete. Later that afternoon, a senior nurse entered his room carrying updated paperwork. While reviewing documents, she casually mentioned, "You were incredibly fortunate. Dr. Carter personally supervised your entire case." Ethan's attention sharpened immediately. "Dr. Carter?" The nurse smiled. "Yes. She rarely takes direct control unless the situation is serious." Ethan remained silent. The confirmation sent a wave of questions through his mind. Before he could ask more, the nurse was called away to assist another patient. Once alone again, he stared through the window at the skyline beyond. For the first time, the possibility felt real. Could Amelia actually be here? Could the woman he once knew have become one of the most accomplished physicians in the country? Hours later, while walking through the recovery wing, Ethan noticed a small crowd gathered near one of the consultation areas. Doctors, residents, and nurses stood listening attentively to someone speaking just beyond his line of sight. Their expressions reflected admiration and respect. Then the crowd slowly parted. Ethan caught only a brief glimpse. A woman in a white coat moving confidently through the corridor. Her face remained partially hidden by distance and movement. Yet something instantly felt familiar. The way she carried herself. The calm authority in her posture. The voice that followed moments later. Ethan stopped walking. His heart began beating faster. The voice was unmistakable now. Not because he had heard it recently, but because he had once heard it every day. Before he could move closer, the woman disappeared around the corner accompanied by several physicians. Ethan remained frozen in place. And for the first time since arriving at the hospital, he no longer wondered whether Amelia Carter was here. He wondered what he would say if he finally stood face to face with her. The answer arrived gradually, not through a dramatic revelation but through countless small details Ethan could no longer ignore. During the next several days, his condition improved steadily. Doctors were pleased with his recovery. Physical therapists encouraged him to walk farther each day. Nurses commented on how quickly his strength was returning. Yet even as his health improved, his attention remained fixed on one person. Dr. Amelia Carter. Everywhere he looked, evidence of her influence appeared. Patients spoke about her with gratitude. Medical residents spoke about her with admiration. Senior physicians treated her as an equal whose opinion carried extraordinary weight. One morning, while passing through the hospital atrium during rehabilitation exercises, Ethan noticed a large digital display celebrating recent medical achievements. Among the featured stories was Amelia's leadership of an international surgical research program. The accompanying photographs showed her speaking at conferences, mentoring young physicians, and receiving awards from respected medical organizations. Ethan stopped walking and stared. The woman in those images looked confident, accomplished, and completely comfortable standing among the best professionals in her field. He remembered a very different chapter of their lives. A small apartment. Student loans. Endless studying. Long nights when Amelia fell asleep surrounded by textbooks. Back then, success felt uncertain. Dreams felt distant. Looking at the display now, Ethan realized she had achieved everything she once hoped for and perhaps much more. Later that afternoon, he overheard two residents discussing a difficult patient case. One of them said, "Dr. Carter reviewed it this morning. She found the solution in less than 10 minutes. The other laughed. "That is why she is Dr. Carter." The comment was simple, but the respect behind it was unmistakable. As the days passed, Ethan found himself thinking less about business and more about the choices he had made years earlier. He remembered conversations where Amelia spoke passionately about medicine. He remembered moments when she needed encouragement but received skepticism instead. The memories were not cruel. They were simply honest. Looking back, he began seeing them from a perspective he never considered before. One evening, Madison arrived with coffee and several magazines. She immediately noticed his thoughtful expression. "You have been quiet lately," she said. Ethan nodded. "I have been thinking." Madison followed his gaze toward a hospital publication resting on the bedside table. The cover featured Dr. Amelia Carter receiving a National Medical Leadership Award. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Madison looked back at him. "That is your ex-wife, isn't it?" Ethan slowly nodded. The words felt strange even now. Madison studied the photograph. "She seems remarkable." Ethan looked at the image again. For the first time, there was no disbelief. No confusion. Only recognition. Amelia had become exactly the person she always wanted to be. Perhaps she always had that potential. Perhaps he simply failed to see it. Outside his room, footsteps echoed through the corridor. A familiar voice exchanged greetings with several staff members nearby. Ethan looked toward the partially open door. This time, he knew with absolute certainty who stood on the other side. And as the footsteps gradually moved closer, he realized the moment he had been anticipating since waking up was finally about to arrive. The moment finally arrived on a quiet Thursday morning. Ethan was seated near the window reviewing discharge information when a soft knock sounded against the door. Before he could answer, it opened slowly. The woman who entered wore a white physician's coat and carried a tablet in one hand. For a brief second, neither moved. Time seemed to pause inside the room. Ethan stared at her face. The years had changed certain details, but not enough to erase recognition. Amelia Carter stood only a few feet away. The same Amelia he once shared dreams with. The same Amelia he had not seen in 7 years. Yet she was also someone entirely new. Confidence surrounded her naturally. Her posture reflected experience. Her calm expression revealed the quiet strength earned through years of responsibility. Ethan felt his breath catch. Every question that had haunted him since waking up suddenly had an answer. Amelia offered a professional smile. "Good morning, Ethan." Hearing his name spoken in her voice removed any remaining doubt. He stared for several seconds before finding words. "It was you." Amelia nodded gently. "Yes." Silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable. Simply heavy with history. Ethan glanced down briefly before looking back at her. You saved my life. Amelia remained composed. I was part of a team that treated you. Even now, she redirected attention away from herself. The humility surprised him almost as much as her success. Ethan shook his head slowly. Everyone keeps talking about what you did. Amelia offered a small smile. Everyone here works very hard. The conversation felt strangely familiar. Years ago, she often responded the same way whenever someone praised her accomplishments. Ethan simply never appreciated it enough. Amelia reviewed several medical updates, discussing recovery milestones and future recommendations with the same professionalism she would offer any patient. Her voice remained calm, clear, focused entirely on his well-being. Not once did she mention their marriage. Not once did she reference the divorce. That restraint affected Ethan more than any criticism could have. Finally, after finishing the consultation, Amelia prepared to leave. Ethan spoke before she reached the door. Amelia. She turned. For the first time, uncertainty appeared in his expression. I owe you more than I can say. Amelia studied him quietly. Then she answered with remarkable simplicity. You do not owe me anything. My responsibility was to help my patient. Those words lingered in the room long after she spoke them. No resentment. No scorekeeping. No desire for recognition. Just grace. Amelia opened the door and stepped into the corridor. Through the glass panel, Ethan watched physicians and nurses immediately approach her with questions. Within seconds she was guiding discussions, reviewing cases, and helping others solve problems. The hospital seemed to move around her effortlessly. Ethan remained seated beside the window long after she disappeared from view. The realization settled deeper with every passing minute. The woman he once underestimated had become someone extraordinary. And somehow, the thing that impressed him most was not her titles, her awards, or even the life she had saved. It was the fact that after everything that happened between them, she still chose compassion when she had every reason not to. A week later, Ethan was well enough to leave the hospital, but life outside those walls no longer felt the same. The experience had altered something inside him. Business meetings resumed. Emails accumulated. Clients expected updates. Yet his thoughts frequently returned to the hospital and to Amelia. Not because she had saved his life, although that alone would have been enough. It was because he could not stop reflecting on the person she had become. One afternoon, several weeks after his discharge, Ethan received an invitation from the medical center. The hospital was hosting its annual Excellence in Medicine Gala, an event recognizing physicians, researchers, and healthcare leaders whose work had transformed countless lives. As a former patient and donor, he was invited to attend. Madison encouraged him to go. You should thank the people who helped you, she said. Ethan agreed. The evening arrived beneath clear autumn skies. The ballroom looked every bit as impressive as the charity event where his own crisis began. Hundreds of guests filled the venue. Hospital executives greeted supporters. Medical professionals gathered around display exhibits showcasing research breakthroughs and humanitarian projects. Throughout the room, one name appeared repeatedly. Dr. Amelia Carter. Ethan noticed it on banners, presentations, and recognition displays. Yet Amelia herself remained nowhere in sight. As the program began, attendees took their seats. The chief executive officer of the hospital delivered opening remarks. Awards were presented. Research achievements were celebrated. Several distinguished physicians received standing ovations. Then the master of ceremonies returned to the stage. His voice carried excitement. Our highest honor tonight recognizes an individual whose leadership, innovation, and dedication have elevated this institution to national prominence. The room grew quiet. A large screen illuminated behind the stage. Images began appearing. Emergency missions. Surgical teams. Medical conferences. Humanitarian outreach programs. Research milestones. The audience watched attentively as the presentation continued. Then Amelia's image filled the screen. A collective murmur spread through the ballroom. Even those who knew her accomplishments seemed moved by the sheer scale of her work. The master of ceremonies continued. This physician has personally led some of the most complex medical cases in our institution's history and has mentored an entire generation of healthcare professionals. Applause erupted immediately. Ethan felt a strange combination of pride and regret. The woman standing on that screen was once the person closest to him. Yet he had never truly understood the depth of her determination. The applause grew louder as Amelia finally stepped onto the stage. Elegant. Composed. Confident. The entire ballroom rose to its feet. Physicians, executives, donors, and guests applauded without hesitation. Some smiled. Others wiped away tears. The respect surrounding her was undeniable. Then came the moment no one expected. The hospital director stepped forward and said, "Many people know Dr. Carter for her extraordinary achievements. What they may not know is that earlier this year, she personally led the team that saved the life of a patient sitting in this very room." The audience turned curiously. Ethan felt every eye slowly finding him. And as silence settled across the ballroom, the truth that had changed his life was about to change the entire room as well. The ballroom remained silent for several seconds after the hospital director finished speaking. Hundreds of guests turned toward Ethan. Some recognized him immediately from the presentation. Others simply followed the attention spreading through the room. Seated among them, Ethan felt the full weight of the moment. Then the director continued. "When this patient arrived at our hospital during a critical medical emergency, Dr. Amelia Carter personally led the team responsible for his care. Her leadership, expertise, and commitment made all the difference." Applause filled the room once again. Yet this time, it was different. The recognition was not only for medical excellence. It was for compassion. For character. For choosing to help someone without hesitation. Ethan looked toward the stage. Amelia stood beneath the lights, calm as always. She accepted the applause with quiet humility. No dramatic reaction. No attempt to draw attention to herself. Just a gracious smile and a simple nod of appreciation. The audience eventually settled, and Amelia stepped forward to deliver her remarks. Her speech lasted only a few minutes, but every word reflected the values that had shaped her journey. She spoke about teamwork. About dedication. About the responsibility physicians carry every day. She thanked mentors, colleagues, nurses, researchers, and support staff. Remarkably, she never mentioned her own achievements. She never mentioned the awards displayed throughout the ballroom. She never mentioned the patient whose life she saved. Her focus remained entirely on others. Ethan listened carefully. Somewhere between her first sentence and her last, another realization settled inside him. The greatest difference between the woman he remembered and the woman standing on that stage was not success. It was confidence. Years ago, Amelia had hoped for a future like this. Now she belonged in it completely. When the speech ended, the audience rose for another standing ovation. The applause seemed endless. Physicians applauded. Executives applauded. Donors applauded. Young medical residents looked inspired. Ethan joined them. Not because everyone else was standing, but because he genuinely wanted to. For the first time in many years, he felt nothing but admiration. Later that evening, as guests prepared to leave, Ethan found Amelia near one of the reception displays. The crowd around her had finally begun to thin. He approached quietly. Amelia smiled when she saw him. "You look healthy," she said. Ethan laughed softly. "Thanks to you." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Ethan looked around the ballroom. The awards. The recognition. The respect. Everything she had built. "I am proud of you," he said sincerely. Amelia seemed surprised for only a second before offering a warm smile. "Thank you." There was no bitterness between them. No unresolved argument waiting to happen. Time had carried them far beyond that chapter. A few minutes later, they said goodbye. Amelia returned to conversations with colleagues while Ethan headed toward the exit. Outside, the Chicago skyline sparkled against the night sky. He paused briefly before stepping into the waiting car. Somewhere behind him, the celebration continued. Ahead of him, life would continue too. Yet one truth remained clear. Amelia never needed revenge. She never needed validation. She never needed anyone to recognize what she was capable of. She simply became extraordinary. And in the end, the most shocking moment was not discovering that his ex-wife had saved his life. It was realizing she had spent years becoming someone the world could no longer ignore.